Hi, I'm Kirk Kernot.
And I'm Ashley Gordon.
And
go.
Welcome to Reading for the Rest of Us,
which is the grassroots reading talk show.
We thought it might be fun in this election season to do novels specifically about politics, and
it wasn't.
Exactly.
It wasn't fun.
It's interesting because I think we both had a lot of the same reactions that this is the first show we've done that felt like work.
Yep, it did. It felt like work. I was trudging through these.
Why do you think that is?
I've been trying to figure that out because despite the fact that we were doing all political books, we really, again, tried to run the gamut so that we had a lot of different kinds of books. So there were murder mysteries, conspiracy theories, spyish novels, satire, some just straight up fiction, that phrase you're going to get to that I never know how to pronounce, which to the layman it just means based on a true story. So although we read in a lot of different areas, most of them were equally difficult, at least in total, you know, all smushed together back to back to back. And being deeply in this election season, which is why I thought this would be such a great idea. So you're reading at the same time that you're keeping up with the election. That may have been it, but I think ultimately the common denominator across these was how often you're reading about unsympathetic characters.
Yeah. It's interesting because if you look, there's been a long argument throughout, I think, literary history about the relationship between the novel and politics, and whether the novel is really a the politics is really a suitable subject for the novel. And I think for a lot of critics, there are a couple problems with it. The one is that a lot of the people doing these books aren't writers per se.
Yeah,
or aren't
that's true,
fiction
and you can
writers. And you picked out 3 of them that are sort of infamous, I think. So you want to just roll those off real quick, and we'll show the.
Well, I started trying to, like I said, do different genres and slightly unexpected ones. So I thought, hey, this will be an opportunity to read Margaret Truman. I love detective fiction, which you'd know if you'd seen episode 2. And so she's writing, I guess because and their first book, Murder in the White House, really read like, okay, I was here and this happened to me. Because one of the main characters is the daughter of the president. And clearly she was an insider, and I think part of what makes these interesting, and we may touch on this again, but the sort of voyeur aspect of it, you get kind of the inside scoop.
Right.
But they're also not, in many cases, they're not writers. They're people in political life who are using their firsthand experience to write about it, whether fiction or nonfiction or some mix of the two.
It almost feels like a way to cash in sometimes.
It did kind of, sort of.
You know, this
Not
one.
to slight Margaret, but
this one here is probably the most famous
classic example.
Cash-in.
But he's a writer.
Yeah.
He was a writer.
But he's not a novelist.
Not
per
a
se.
novelist.
It wasn't up until this point.
And of course, we're not really talking about Anonymous. We're talking about Joe Klein.
Joe Klein. And people, I think, don't really even know that this book came out, but there was one last year that was a sort of takeoff on Primary Colors called O, which is supposed to be the Obama.
I never heard of it until I started doing this research.
I think there was so little controversy in the Obama administration that made for juicy fiction that this book really really flopped in a lot of ways. It's interesting about
his ears are really what you have to go for.
It's a funny cover, but on the other hand, the guy that wrote it actually turned out to be Mark Salter, who is John McCain's right-hand man. He's co-written all of John McCain's books, so he's actually a good writer. But I think this is a good example of something comes up with novels about politics, is when you come at it with an agenda, it sort of blows the storyline, and I think the reader kind of feels a little, and it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum.
No, and that was true. It doesn't matter what your political leanings are, and I purposefully wore sort of purple-ish, so I'm right there in the middle. Yeah, and so Primary Colors in Joe Klein, clearly he's a Clinton insider guy, and he's writing about his own campaign. And then if he's writing about the other side.
Right.
I mean, you feel, I'm not sure manipulated, but buffeted, I think would be the word. It just keeps coming at you.
Yeah.
And at some point you think, can I just have a story? I
Mm-hmm.
just want a story. And not to say that they were all bad, because they weren't, and not to say that every book from beginning to end didn't have some points of enjoyment in it, because the Margaret Trumans, they really were sort of fun.
Yeah.
And they're kind of pulpy murder mysteries, and she kind of moves her way around DC. And
I don't think you read them for great insight into
Not hers.
The politics. And I don't even think with Primary Colors or you know, I really do think they're sort of cash-ins, which
Yeah.
is fine, and they're
Or
fun.
the
and-
voyeurism.
yeah, exactly.
I wanted to see what really happened
Yeah.
in the Clinton campaign.
I think the other big challenge, though, and this is the one I have with political novels that are based on true stories, there's a genre, and this is the term that you were making fun of me for using, but you know, I feel the need to validate.
Professor speak.
Exactly, I need to validate my credentials here. But there's a genre called the roman à clef, which is the novel that features fictional characters based on recognizably identifiable people. So when we read Primary Colors, we're not really caring about the characters, the fictional characters. We're caring about Bill Clinton. So there's a sense there that I think with political novels is, why bother to read the novel when you could read the real story? Why read fiction when you can read the true political story? I mean, there are umpteen exposés of Clinton by '96 when Primary Colors came out.
Don't you think it comes down to the talent of the writer? Because in this one, so American Wife, no, keep
Flip too
scrolling.
soon.
Nope, you're good. American Wife. So the writer's very talented.
Yeah.
She's a very good writer, good novelist, had a reputation already established as a novelist, nothing to do with politics. She based this on an actual biography of Laura Bush, but she goes much further afield. On the one hand, it really read like a novel.
Mm-hmm.
You do get involved with the character. In the early stages, she's quite likable and very empathetic. And it's not so much that she becomes less likable toward the end, but she actually becomes less real.
Yeah.
The more the politics got infused and the more Sittenfeld, right? The more Sittenfeld seemed to be constrained by what we all knew to have happened, the less creative it became,
Yeah.
and the less inner monologue there was
Right.
for the main character. But I did find myself distracted because I'm thinking, well, did this really happen to Laura? Because I wasn't terribly familiar with her early biography.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew the librarian stuff. But so then I'd get distracted. Well, was this fiction or was it nonfiction? And so you don't have with the roman à clef, which to those of us who read and don't hear it, it looks like roman à clef. You do get somewhat distracted, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be more fun as a reader to just read.
Yeah.
And kind of like you said, if I want to know about the Clintons, I'll read about the Clintons. So I think in the hands of a really skilled writer, which she is,
definitely is,
for
yeah.
about the first 350
Mhm.
pages, 500 pages, it was very, I enjoyed it.
I think the notion is, or the aspiration is, that because you have all these tools as a fiction writer to be able to get into people's minds, to be able to sort of explore the growth of their character much more than you really can in biography or in a political expose, that the hope there is that you're able to account for actions or emotions even more. Certainly the most famous roman à clef, and it's the most famous political American political novel, is Robert Penn Warren's All the King's Men, which, you know, I don't think people still read this novel for beyond the fact that it's,
For fun.
yeah, well, we'll talk about that in a second. You know, based on the story of Huey Long, the Kingfisher, the governor of Louisiana in the 30s, there was a time where I think this novel really did have the reputation, probably for almost 40 years, of being one of the very few American political novels that was able to take something real and make it literary, make it quote-unquote universal in the sense of exploring the notions of character. It's interesting. I think this is a great example of a novel that has aged poorly, probably in the last 25 to 30 years.
Yeah, you've said that, and I would say, because I've got a different edition from the one,
Yeah.
I think, from that one. So what I found most interesting about this one,
Besides the size.
yeah, is that they went back to the original manuscript and a lot of the handwritten notes from Robert Penn Warren, and they looked, and as a former editor, you know, I had to think, okay, how do I really feel about this? So they looked at what the editor and the publisher had done, and particularly the changes they made that seemed to be sort of representative of the social mores of the time.
Right.
And put back a lot of what the author originally intended. So what was fascinating about this was really that question of how has it aged? Why did it age? Why did it become dated? Was that something due to the commercialism that was imposed on it?
Yeah.
And does it stand up better when you go back to what the author originally wrote? And I think in writing about politics, because you are often writing about something that's immediate for people and very much of its time and place, it is hard for it to age well.
It's interesting, and I'm glad you brought that up about there being two versions of that, because I'm not sure that a lot of people really know that. So, you know, buyer beware when you go out there to pick up a copy of it. It was a guy named Neil Polk who was just passed away this summer at a relatively young age. Phenomenal scholar, textual scholar, did a lot of Faulkner stuff. And
Mississippi guy, right?
Right,
Good
right.
Southerner.
And very devoted Southerner. But he was roasted for putting out this new version, and Joyce Carol Oates was one of the people that really came out after him. I think that for as fascinating as the differences between the two books are, and they're pretty stunning. I mean,
yeah, there's some big stuff. Like the main character's name is totally different.
Right. No Willie Stark in this one. So the is it Stark or is it Jack Burden that's different?
No, Stark.
Now. Stark. That's I had a momentary fear that I was spreading
We're all
misinformation.
Getting old, man.
That's true. But the problem is still the same. Is as you're reading this, are you reading it for the literary sort of invention on top of the true story, or are you coming at it because you're interested in what was the big deal about Huey Long in the 30s? It's kind of interesting because if you go back, this is one of maybe 7 or 8 novels that were based on Huey Long that came out after his assassination on up through really the mid to late 50s. People were just fascinated with this guy. And it really spoke to a political drive or a political fear in America of fascism. People don't remember this nowadays, but there was a point where Huey Long was kind of considered the American Mussolini, and it was all about the fear of his, the fear of political charisma, the fear of political character. And I think this is one of the ways in which this book does a little bit transcend the notion of we're just reading it for history, because he really can explore what is the attraction to this guy? How does he do all of his deals? How does he get things done? How does he grease the wheels? I think for most readers what becomes a problem in getting through all the King's Men is there's this whole other aperture, apparatus around the book of symbols and history and the meaning of history.
A lot of that.
Yeah. And it really reflects a time where that's when you were writing the great American novel. That's what you did.
It smacks of the great American novel. Okay, but you said, so there was the fear of his charisma at the time, which is fascinating because that is not what we're afraid of anymore.
Right.
And what I was reading with mostly modern novels, especially with Primary Colors, to some degree with An American Wife, and then this one, which is an American politics, but J.K. Rowling's book, it's all about charisma, and charismas are a very positive thing for a politician to have, and it seems to be almost the only thing they have that's genuine.
Right.
I mean, that was one of the other sort of common themes through all of these, is that there seems to always be some kind of secret that we're trying to, keep under wraps at all costs, including killing people.
Right.
Or the complete lack of core, and that it's the people that sort of follow them, they're all Pied Pipers, really.
I think I think that's still the enigma of Primary Colors. Although I got to be honest with you, I've never met anybody who's read Primary Colors after about 1998. I think when the Monica Lewinsky scandal happened, everybody sort of put that book away and thought,
it
well,
eclipsed what
yeah,
primary.
exactly.
Well, I wonder if 10 years from now, if Bill Clinton is no longer a major political figure, if people will go back to it, or if they really do have a limited shelf life,
Yeah.
and All the King's Men does turn out to be one of the few that survives.
Well, the only way Bill Clinton's not going to be a major political figure is when Bill Clinton is dead.
Which
I think we're
really
pretty
didn't
well.
mean to say.
I think we're pretty well.
Not wishing death on anybody.
Know that, but and you know, you and I are both admire the man a lot. But it is funny how tenaciously he's sort of clung to his public identity.
Well, we'll see if the politician lives longer than the books
Right.
about the politician.
Yeah,
I think that's an
I
interesting question.
honestly think that this is kind of a time capsule of a moment of idealism that really, you know, I was rereading Primary Colors just to try to remember what happened in it, and you know, pretty good summary of it is woman, woman, woman. You know, I mean, it's just, you know, it's kind of predictable in that way, but. I think it speaks to a moment in 1992 where people on the liberal side sort of had to come to grips with the fact that whatever idealism they had, aspirations they had for the baby boom generation, of which Clinton was the first elected president, that they were going to have to make some compromises and some bargains with the devil.
Okay, so I wonder if that isn't part of what these books do, because one of the questions we were kind of batting around was, do books about politics bring people closer to politics?
Yeah.
Does it expose some kind of penury? Would that be the right word, or just avariciousness,
Yeah.
or just yuck about these people? But here's what I started to think after reading through all these. I don't think at this point any of us are surprised that these people are fallible.
Right, right.
I think we all know that our politicians on either side are human beings, and you know, they have moments of weakness, shall we say, and certainly failings. So I was wondering if do reading about this, and because part of why we read, I think most people, is to put ourselves in that character's place, to find an understanding with somebody other than ourselves.
Yeah.
Does reading Primary Colors, does reading American Wife, or any of these novels, does it somehow humanize their failings?
Yeah.
Rather than making us more cynical, is it possible, since we're already pretty aware that they're not saints?
Well, let me ask you that question as it relates to two of the books that you chose. I'm curious, in American Wife, after you read that, did you feel more empathy or sympathy toward?
I did.
Okay.
I did, and I think partly was because, not that I didn't feel empathy for Laura Bush before, but I think she was such a private person.
Yeah.
She was such a quiet person.
And that made her
It wasn't hostile, it was
yeah.
just unknown. And this made her much more sentient. She was
Right.
three-dimensional. So in that sense, I think it served her well. But then again, this is a lot of interior dialogue for a completely fictional person, and I would be very careful to impose that on her. It's not hers.
Yeah, yeah.
And we can't ever get inside somebody's head for real.
I think what she was trying to do was to understand a type of American woman, the political wife. Not the good wife of television who's the one that stands next to her man, but I hate to say this and make it ideological, but it's an attempt to understand a Republican wife, I think, in a lot of ways.
Or I think what she was trying to do was somebody who starts out a Democrat who marries a Republican. And I think if we take the labels off, I'm really leery
Yeah.
of that. So I think what this book can be, yes, it's about politics, but I think all of us in our lives are called upon to make choices. Especially in a marriage.
Yeah.
So it's kind of any wife, or to some degree any husband.
Yeah.
You know, when you align yourself with another person, be it a kid and a parent, a spouse to spouse, and in some cases even brother, sister, and siblings, to what degree are you responsible for that other person's actions and thoughts?
Yeah.
And that's a hard call.
Especially if you don't necessarily agree with them.
And even if you do,
Yeah.
I mean, do you get to take credit for what you like and you don't get to claim what you don't? I mean, I think the same is true whether you agree or not.
Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, all of these, particularly the ones that touch on the families, and not just families, but the people who attach themselves to a candidate, their lives, their well-being, their livelihood are attached to this person. And you know, how much are we on our own? How much is a man an island?
Yeah.
And how much are we responsible for, beholden to, just stuck with what the people that we love or admire or, you know,
Or
how
attached
much is
to.
this, yeah. How much is it ours?
Let me ask you this as it relates to this novel, because this one is the big blockbuster of the season.
Yes, it's
and,
the buzz.
And it's not American politics, but it's very much
but it's
related
politics.
to.
And it definitely translates.
Now this is partly a roman à clef. It's not. I guess maybe it's not because but it is sort of based on a true story, or at least the beginnings of one. But I'm curious about your opinion of this book, because
it was a hard book to
Yeah.
read, I have to say, and I would have put it down, I think, because there's some really difficult scenes. This is not for your 12-year-old. The things that I love about J.K. Rowling's writing, and of course I've read all the Harry Potters more than once, the observations of humanity and our foibles and the things that make us human, she was spot on, and she had a little more leeway because she could say things that she couldn't in Harry Potter. So I recognized her writing. Some of the humor was there when there was any humor.
Yeah.
So there were moments where I laughed right out loud. Somebody described this, I read in one of the reviews, it was not a question of good versus evil, but funny versus evil, because there's not a lot of good. I mean, there are very few people in this book that you really wanted to hang out with. And she definitely had a social agenda. I saw an interview with her not long ago, and she was talking about when she lived off public support, and it's part of why she said she still lives in England and pays enormous taxes, because that's what kept her afloat.
That's what financed the first
the
5
early
years
days
of writing
of Harry Potter.
the first
right,
first
so
book.
she feels pretty strongly
Yeah.
about helping people and the social fabric. And so this book clearly has a social agenda, and it's not a happy one.
Yeah.
And you're not happy at the end. I kept reading all the way to the end thinking it will get better and I will feel a little better, and I just didn't.
Yeah.
But it's so wonderfully well written.
I think you know, it's when you talk about how political books are going to end, you asked earlier, do they bring us closer to the politics? And I think, quite honestly, the answer today is no, because I think we're too cynical for it. In fact, one of the genres we were talking about that's related to this is the idea of the political conspiracy thriller. And sort of the popularity of books like David Baldacci's Camel Club series, which is led by a guy named Oliver Stone, you know, funny enough. But I think one of the things that it does is it feeds our notion that politics is about conspiracy. And in some ways I wonder if that's not a satisfying answer to the alternative, which is there's nobody at the wheel.
Yeah, they're all just bumbling along.
Exactly, that nobody has their grip on the system. At least with these books, we can take comfort in knowing, and honestly, it's the same reason that people like Huey Long were both admired and feared. It's because there's a notion of some political strong man, person, who is in charge, maybe secretly, but you know, the idea that we're not just flying loose and
it's not just by
free.
the seat of our pants.
Exactly.
Which is actually the message in the book that got me through this. Because while I was slogging through all of these not terribly happy stories, I was listening to a book that I've read a couple of times, but wanted to hear instead of read. So I was doing them concurrently. Our Man in Havana, which, you know, sort of sounds like it's sort of a spy novel, but it's really a spoof on politics and bureaucracy and government. And I laughed right out loud because he's clearly saying there's nobody in charge.
Yeah.
And I was struck this time by the parallels between this book and Monty Python. So do you remember in Search for the Holy Grail, where Arthur, you know, ta-dunk with his coconuts, rides up to the castle, the French castle, and he's trying to talk to somebody, and there the French soldiers are up there, and they're, you know, and making raspberries, and your mother smells of elderberries. And Arthur's just completely befuddled and says, is there somebody else I could talk to? Well, that was sort of what I felt like. That's Our Men in Havana.
Yeah.
There are definitely scenarios in that where they're totally talking at cross purposes. Nobody's listening.
Right.
And you really, and then you look at all of these political books and politics in general, and sort of as the overwhelmed Arthur, you think, isn't there somebody else I could talk to?
Yeah.
Is this really it?
Books like that really, and you know, it's kind of, there's a tradition of them. The movie Wag the Dog was based on a pretty good one.
Yeah. We hadn't talked about movies at all, which is.
But the idea is that what you're making fun of is the bureaucracy and the way that the institutions take over, and it becomes very fatalistic. It's almost like The Wire, where nobody is ever going to win or pull anything off.
Which is exactly what happens in Our Man in Havana.
Exactly.
He's making all this stuff up, and suddenly everybody believes it and starts acting on it.
And it's just done for laughs. So I think those are interesting sort of opposites, where you have the conspiracy where it's
satisfying.
Yeah, as somebody's in charge, but then the opposite of where every politician
conspiracy and nobody's in
charge. Exactly.
And really, what you come down to is politics is all local.
Yes.
Thank you, Tip O'Neill, and the Rowling book really shows that too. But it's either performance art or farce, or both, and that's really what you come away with all of these.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up by talking about one genre that surprisingly might surprise people, that actually there are political novels in, and that's young adult fiction. We don't necessarily think of kids as being interested in politics. But there is an interesting book that I read called Vote for Larry.
I'm thinking you just wanted that cover.
Well, that was my initial attraction. But I actually did get beyond into the entire thing. This is a book that is a sort of spoof of the 2004 election, and I think it dramatizes one of the other challenges of doing a political novel, is that when it's recent history, it's weird. Fictional versions of reading recent history, it messes with your sense of time.
Oh, really?
As I was reading this book, I kept thinking to myself, man, you know, 2004 just seems like decades ago. Ages ago. So,
what was life in politics before Twitter?
Right. But ultimately what these books do is encourage kids to be active and to be political. So we're going to wrap up on that note, and we'll be back again. And what's our next episode going to be on?
Our next episode is A Much Happier Place.
That's right.
It is Sense of Place, and it'll be a lot of fun.
Great. So thank you very much, and in the meantime, read a good book.